When we think of medieval clothing, we often picture knights in shining armor or ladies in flowing gowns. But what about their winter wear? How did medieval people stay warm during the cold winter months? And what can their clothing choices tell us about their status and wealth? Today, we are going to take a closer look at some of the other materials and techniques that people used to keep warm in the Middle Ages. We will also explore how these materials could be used to make a statement about one's social status and wealth. So join us as we uncover the secrets of medieval winter fashion and find out what the clothes on their backs can teach us about life in the Middle Ages. What would you put on if you knew you had to survive the winter? Would you choose something warm or something fancy? Well, your answer matters because medieval people were no different from you. They had to balance staying warm with looking good. It's all about layering up. And it doesn't mean just throwing on any extra clothes. It's a carefully balanced act of putting the right clothes on the right way. The medieval people knew that the key to surviving the winter was layering their clothing. They understood that the air pockets created between the layers of clothing could trap heat and keep them warm in sub-zero temperatures. The outer layer of clothing was typically made of a waterproof material, such as a hooded cloak or a long coat made of thick wool or leather. This helped to shield the wearer from the wind and snow and prevent their clothes from getting wet. If their clothes got wet, they would lose their ability to keep the wearer warm. The middle layer of clothing was usually made of a warm material, such as wool or linen. This helped to insulate the body and keep it warm. Depending on the severity of the winter, people might wear a padded jacket or a waistcoat as their middle layer. Some of these waistcoats might be stuffed with straw or even sawdust, providing additional warmth without adding too much bulk. Now, before you start picturing lumberjacks wearing these, remember that not everyone could afford such luxuries. For poorer folks, a simple woolen tunic or a thick homespun shirt served as the middle layer. These were practical, affordable options that still provided some much-needed warmth. Then came the inner layer of clothing, which was typically made of linen or wool. A linen under tunic or a wool under shirt helped to wick away moisture from the body and keep the wearer dry. This was important for several reasons. Firstly, it prevented the outer layers of clothing from getting wet, which could have made them less effective at keeping the wearer warm. Secondly, it helped to reduce odors as sweat and moisture from the body could cause the clothing to smell unpleasant. And finally, it kept the wearer more comfortable by reducing friction between the skin and the outer layers of clothing. Overall, this layering system was an effective way for medieval people to stay warm and survive the harsh winters. It also allowed them to adapt to different temperatures by removing or adding layers as needed. So while it may seem like a lot of clothing, each layer had a purpose and contributed to the overall survival of the wearer. But there was more to their fashion sense than just practicality. Their clothing also said a lot about who they were and what they valued. Let's take wool, for instance. It was the king of medieval fibers, prized for its warmth, durability, and versatility. But not all wool was the same. The type of wool used, the color, the weave, and even the embellishments could make a significant difference in the final product and communicate a lot about the wearer. For example, wool from different sheep breeds had different qualities. The thickness and length of the wool varied, and some sheep produced wool that was better suited for certain purposes. For instance, the Lincoln Longwool sheep were known for producing long and lustrous wool that was perfect for weaving into high-quality textiles. On the other hand, the Wensleydale sheep produced shorter and thicker wool that was better suited for making sturdy blankets and rugs. The color of the wool was also important. Natural dyes were often used to color wool, and the choice of color could communicate a lot about the wearer's social status and personal style. For example, in England during the 14th century, the color red was associated with wealth and power, while the color blue was seen as more humble and was more commonly worn by the working class. The weave of the fabric also played an important role in its final appearance and functionality. Different weaves could create different textures and patterns, and they could also affect the durability and warmth of the fabric. For example, a tight and closely woven fabric would be more durable and less likely to fray, while a looser weave would be more breathable but less durable. In addition to the materials and construction of the wool, the embellishments and accessories used to decorate garments could also communicate a lot about the wearer. For example, a cloak or a hood lined with fur could signify wealth and power, as fur was a luxury item that was often reserved for the upper classes. Similarly, the use of metal thread or other decorative elements could also add to the overall impression of wealth and sophistication. So when it comes to wool in the Middle Ages, it's clear that it was more than just a practical material. It was a way for people to communicate their social status, personal style, and values through their clothing. Beyond wool, other materials were also used to add a touch of luxury to medieval winter wear. Fur, for example, was highly prized for its warmth and was often used to line hoods, cloaks, and hats. While wool was more common among the general populace, fur was more common among the wealthy. This is not only because fur was more expensive, but also because hunting and killing animals for their fur was a privilege reserved for the nobility. Another material that was used in medieval winter wear was leather. Leather was a durable and versatile material that could be used to make a variety of garments, including jackets, belts, and shoes. While leather was more commonly used by the working class, it was not uncommon for the wealthy to wear leather garments as well. In fact, some of the most highly prized leather garments were those made from the skins of exotic animals, such as snakes and lizards. These garments were not only warm, but also displayed the wealth and power of the wearer. Finally, there was the humble, quilted or padded garment. Quilting was a common technique used to trap air and provide extra warmth to garments such as coats and jackets. This technique consisted of placing layers of padding, such as cotton or linen, between two layers of fabric and then stitching them together. The result was a warm and durable garment that could withstand the rigors of daily life in the Middle Ages. Padded garments were popular among both the rich and poor, as they were an effective way to stay warm without having to wear multiple layers of heavy clothing. For the wealthy, padded garments could be made with more expensive materials, such as silk or velvet, while the poor often made do with whatever materials they had available. Regardless of the material used, padded garments were an essential part of winter wear in the Middle Ages, so whether it was the type of wool used, the style of the garment, or the embellishments added, medieval people had a wide range of options when it came to expressing themselves through their winter clothing. But wait, there's more. There were also plenty of regional differences when it came to winter wear. For example, in Northern Europe, where winters were harsher, people wore thicker and warmer clothing than those in Southern Europe. Similarly, in mountainous regions, where people were often working outdoors in cold and wet conditions, they developed specialized clothing made from materials such as leather and wool to keep them warm and dry. And let's not forget about the influence of the church. During the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was a major landowner and employer in Europe, and as such, it had a significant influence on the clothing worn by medieval people. Church officials and clergy members often wore distinctive clothing that set them apart from the general population. For example, monks often wore long, heavy robes made from wool or other warm materials to keep them warm during the long winter nights when they spent a lot of time in prayer. These robes were often a sign of the monastic order to which the monk belonged, and were an important part of their religious identity. Similarly, priests and other clergy members often wore special garments for different religious ceremonies and rituals. For example, bishops and archbishops wore ornate robes and mitres during important services and were often heavily ornamented with gold and jewels. These garments were not only a symbol of the church's power and wealth, but also a way to give the wearer a sense of solemnity and importance. Now, have you ever wondered what the coldest winter on record was? Stay tuned till the end of this video to find out. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button for more fascinating historical tales. We've just delved into the diverse world of medieval winter fashion, exploring how people of different social classes and regions coped with the cold weather. From the luxurious velvets of the nobles to the humble woolens of the peasants, we've seen how clothing choices not only reflected personal circumstances, but also communicated social status and personal values. Remember, it wasn't just about staying warm, it was about doing so in style. As we wrap up our journey through time, I want you to consider the role that clothing plays in communicating our identities today. Just like our medieval counterparts, our clothing choices say a lot about who we are and what we value. So what do your clothes say about you? And now for a little bonus. The coldest winter on record was in 1683 to 1684, when the entire continent of Europe experienced exceptionally low temperatures. This period became known as the Great Frost, and it caused widespread crop failures and famine across the region. The freezing temperatures persisted for several months, and people had to resort to extreme measures to stay warm. It was during this time that many people started wearing multiple layers of clothing and using hoods and scarves to cover their faces. The Great Frost had a profound impact on European history, and it played a significant role in shaping the clothing and culture of the time. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more fascinating tales from history. Until next time, stay warm and stay curious.